Welcome to the Empathy Stories channel, where we share powerful stories that challenge perceptions and inspire change. In today's story, we witness the transformative journey of Olivia and Adam, two individuals from different worlds, brought together by a moment of realization that changes everything. Prepare to be moved by the power of empathy, resilience, and the potential for growth when we open our hearts to others. Let's dive in. The flight from New York to Miami should have been a welcome respite for Dr. Olivia Carter. But even in the first-class cabin, where the plush seats beckon relaxation and quiet, she couldn't escape the weight of the world on her shoulders. At 38, Olivia had already accomplished more than most could hope for in a lifetime. As one of the youngest trauma surgeons at Memorial Hospital, she had earned respect and admiration from her peers, respect that came only after years of battling doubt, discrimination, and prejudice. Olivia's journey had not been easy. Raised in a modest neighborhood of Brooklyn, she'd witnessed her parents' relentless work ethic, a tireless pursuit of providing for their family that had shaped her own values. Her father, a high school teacher, often worked late into the night, preparing lessons for his students. Her mother, a dedicated nurse, worked long hours at a local hospital, tending to patients in need. Their sacrifices were not without reason. Olivia had inherited their drive, their discipline, and their belief in the power of education. She had learned early that dreams were achieved not through luck, but through grit. As a child, she lost herself in books, stories about adventurers, explorers, and pioneers. Her thirst for knowledge never waned. She excelled in science at school, earning a scholarship to Princeton University, where she pursued a degree in biology. Even there, in the hallowed halls of academia, she was forced to fight for her place. As a black woman in a field still dominated by men, and predominantly white men at that, Olivia's abilities were questioned more times than she cared to count. But she persisted, determined to prove her worth. When she earned a spot at Johns Hopkins Medical School, she did so not with ease, but through unyielding tenacity. Her time as a resident at Memorial was equally hard-earned. The long hours, the unrelenting pressure, the sharp stares of those who thought she didn't belong. Olivia had faced them all, but she didn't let it stop her. She had learned to carry herself with dignity, allowing her work to speak for itself. In a world that didn't always welcome her, her quiet strength and expertise became her shield. She was a leader in the operating room, admired for her ability to remain calm under pressure. Yet outside of it, there were still those who saw her as less than, not fully deserving of her success. That afternoon, as Olivia settled into her seat, she longed for an escape from the constant battle of being seen as something other than what she was, a skilled and compassionate doctor. Her colleagues had practically forced her to take the vacation, insisting that she needed a break. They were right. Of course. The emotional toll of her career had been mounting, and she knew it was time to recharge. She had booked a trip to Miami, hoping to spend her days on the beach, away from the chaos of a hospital, away from the expectations that constantly weighed on her. But as she sank into the soft leather of her first-class seat, she couldn't help but notice the glances, the brief, lingering stares that seemed to follow her every move. A black woman in first class was still something of an anomaly. Olivia had grown used to these moments, used to being judged, silently scrutinized before even speaking a word. She met their gazes with the same calm expression she had perfected over the years, offering polite smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes. She had learned how to navigate these moments with grace, to shield herself from the subtle prejudices that were all too common. Her seatmate, a man in his early 50s, finally arrived and began struggling with a large carry-on bag. His attempts to hoist the bag into the overhead compartment were met with frustration. His face flushed with the effort. Olivia watched him silently, hoping he wouldn't engage her. She just wanted peace, a brief moment to herself before the flight took off. But of course, he did. "Would you like some help with that?" she offered politely, her voice warm and neutral. The man barely glanced at her. "No, I've got it," he snapped curtly, his tone sharp. Olivia said nothing, sitting back in her seat, her lips pressing into a thin line. It was clear that the man was irritated, but she had no intention of engaging further. Moments later, a flight attendant approached. "Sir, I'm afraid that bag is too large for the overhead compartment," she said, her tone professional. "We'll need to check it." The man's face reddened even more. "Are you kidding me? I've flown first class for years, and this has never been an issue," he barked. "I'm sorry, sir," the flight attendant responded. "We have to follow safety protocols." With a loud grumble, the man finally handed over the bag. He dropped heavily into the seat next to Olivia, his frame spilling over the armrest. She shifted slightly, trying to make herself smaller, just hoping to get through the flight without further discomfort. "Well, first class isn't what it used to be," he muttered, loud enough for Olivia to hear. Olivia forced a polite smile, trying to remain calm. "It can be frustrating," she said, hoping the conversation would end there. But instead, the man turned to her, narrowing his eyes as he studied her. "And what would you know about it?" he asked, his tone now dripping with condescension. "You some kind of expert?" The familiar tightness in Olivia's chest returned. She could feel the tension building, a warning that this conversation was about to take a turn. She looked at him coolly. "Actually, yes," she replied evenly. "I'm a trauma surgeon, Dr. Olivia Carter." For a brief moment, the man seemed taken aback, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. But it didn't last long. "Matthew Langston," he said reluctantly, extending a hand. "CEO of Langston Development." Olivia shook his hand briefly, sensing his discomfort. She was about to turn away when he spoke again, this time with even more skepticism in his voice. "A surgeon, huh?" he said, his tone dismissive. "What kind of surgeries do you do?" "Trauma," Olivia replied, keeping her voice steady. "Emergencies, like car accidents, gunshot wounds, that sort of thing." Matthew raised an eyebrow, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Impressive," he said, though the doubt in his voice was unmistakable. "You seem a little young for that kind of role." Olivia's jaw tightened, but she kept her tone measured. "I've been practicing for nearly a decade," she replied. "I completed my residency at Memorial." Matthew looked her over with thinly veiled skepticism. "Must be nice," he said dismissively. "Taking a vacation to Miami. I remember when I was starting out, I could barely afford a weekend at the beach." Olivia bit back the frustration rising in her chest. "I've worked hard for this," she said simply. "Self-care is important in a high-stress profession." Matthew scoffed. "Self-care? That's what they're calling it these days." "Huh." Olivia remained silent. She had no intention of continuing this conversation. But as she was about to tune him out, something happened that demanded her attention. A commotion erupted at the front of the cabin. A man had collapsed in his seat, clutching his chest and gasping for air. The quiet of the cabin was shattered as passengers scrambled for help. But Olivia knew there was no time to waste. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood quickly. "I'm a doctor," she called to the flight attendant. "Please move. I need space." She didn't wait for a response. As she made her way down the aisle, her mind was already working, calculating the symptoms in her head. Chest pain, shortness of breath. Her instincts kicked in immediately. "Stay calm." "Sir," Olivia said, kneeling beside the man. "I need the first aid kit. And aspirin, if you have it." Her hands moved with practiced precision, and the other passengers watched in awe as she took control of the situation. A nurse seated nearby offered her assistance, and together they stabilized the man. His breathing became steadier, and Olivia's focus never wavered. In the corner of her eye, she could see Matthew. His face was a mixture of shock and guilt, his previous condescension now replaced by something else, something closer to admiration. When the man was finally stabilized, the cabin erupted into applause. Olivia ignored the claps and murmurs of admiration. Her mind focused on the patient. She simply returned to her seat, her heart still racing with adrenaline. "Dr. Carter," Matthew said, his voice hesitant. I didn't realize. I shouldn't have." Olivia met his gaze, her expression calm but firm. "Maybe next time," she said coolly. "You'll think twice before making assumptions." For the rest of the flight, Matthew remained silent. uncharacteristically humbled by the encounter. As the plane touched down in Miami, Matthew cleared his throat. "Dr. Carter," he said again, this time quieter, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong to judge you." Olivia paused, her gaze steady. "It's not just about an apology, Mr. Langston," she replied. "It's about understanding why you made those assumptions in the first place." Matthew nodded slowly, a flicker of shame crossing his face. "You're right," he admitted softly. "I have a lot to think about." Olivia nodded slightly, her face unreadable. She had planted a seed of change, not just in Matthew, but in everyone who had witnessed the encounter. And for her, that was enough. As she stepped off the plane into the warm Miami air, Olivia felt a rare sense of lightness. The confrontation had been draining, but she knew that in her quiet, composed way, she had made a difference, and that was the most powerful thing she could offer. Adam Langston sat in his luxurious penthouse in Miami. The faint hum of the city beyond his large windows, a distant reminder of the world he controlled. At 52, he was accustomed to power, success, and admiration. As the CEO of Langston Development, one of the most successful real estate firms in the country, Adam had spent his life climbing the corporate ladder, knocking down every obstacle in his path, and reshaping the cityscape around him. His wealth, his status, and his reputation had been built on a foundation of relentless ambition and an unyielding belief in his own superiority. But today, for the first time in years, Adam felt shaken. The events of the flight from New York to Miami had lingered in his mind, swirling in the quiet moments when he was alone, when the facade of control cracked just enough to allow doubt to creep in. The woman, Dr. Olivia Carter, had completely unsettled him. Her calm, unwavering confidence, the way she had taken charge of the situation with the man having a heart attack, had left him in awe. But it wasn't just her medical expertise that had caused him to pause. It was the way she had handled him, the way she had stood her ground when he had dismissed her, the way she had silenced his assumptions without ever raising her voice. As a man who was used to being the one in control, the one who commanded respect with a glance or a few well-placed words, Adam had never encountered anyone like Olivia. She had turned the tables on him, and it wasn't just the apology he had given on the plane that lingered in his mind. It was the question she had posed to him. "Why did you make those assumptions in the first place?" she had asked him. The words haunted him, stuck with him long after the plane had landed and he had returned to his usual life of meetings, deals, and contracts. He had grown used to seeing the world through the lens of his own privilege, believing his success was the result of his superior intellect and ability to outsmart anyone who stood in his way. But Olivia had opened his eyes to something he had never fully considered before. His assumptions were the product of a world that had been kind to him simply because of who he was, a rich white man in a world that had been built for him. Adam had tried to brush it off. After all, what was there to truly question? He was the CEO of a major company. He had built an empire. He was admired, feared, and respected. But Olivia's presence, her ability to hold her ground without ever becoming defensive or combative, had cut through his armor like a scalpel. It was a reminder of the harsh truths he preferred to ignore, the unspoken biases that ran deep within him, and the privileges he had long taken for granted. Now, several days later, Adam found himself searching for answers. His usual defenses were up, but something about the way Olivia had spoken to him, with such quiet authority and grace, kept pulling him back into the memory of their interaction. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this woman than the assumptions he had initially made. She wasn't just some black woman in a first-class seat. She wasn't just a doctor, a trauma surgeon. No less. One who had saved a life in front of a cabin full of passengers. No, Olivia Carter was someone who had earned every inch of her success. And perhaps it was time he stopped seeing her through the lens of his own prejudice. Determined to understand more, Adam had arranged to meet Olivia. He needed to confront the discomfort that had been gnawing at him. It was time for him to acknowledge the truth she had revealed, to see beyond his own biases, and maybe, just maybe, begin to unravel the layers of himself he had long refused to confront. The meeting was set for lunch in one of the most exclusive restaurants in Miami. Olivia had agreed to meet him, though Adam could sense her wariness. She wasn't one to engage in casual conversations with people she didn't trust. And given their previous interaction, he knew he had a lot to make up for. When Olivia arrived, Adam couldn't help but notice the way she carried herself. Unapologetically confident, yet composed. She was dressed simply but elegantly, a stark contrast to the lavish surroundings of the restaurant. Adam, in his usual tailored suit, felt out of place for the first time in a long while. "Dr. Carter," he greeted her, standing up as she approached. "Mr. Langston," she replied coolly, extending her hand. They exchanged pleasantries, and as they sat down, Adam felt the weight of the silence between them. He had never been good at small talk, especially not with someone who had already seen through his carefully constructed exterior. "I've been thinking about our conversation on the plane," Adam began, his voice tentative. "I owe you an apology, but I also feel like there's something more I need to understand." Olivia raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, her expression unreadable. Adam continued. "You made me realize something I've been avoiding for a long time," he said, his words coming slowly, carefully. "I've spent my entire life assuming that my success is the result of my abilities, my work ethic, but maybe there's more to it. Maybe I've been blind to the privileges I've had, the biases I've held, without even realizing it." Olivia listened quietly, her eyes steady. She didn't rush to interrupt or offer a quick judgment. She simply allowed him the space to speak, which, Adam realized, was far more unsettling than if she had tried to fix him or explain away his shortcomings. "I've spent years building my empire, but I've never truly considered how the world sees me," Adam admitted, his voice lower now. "I've never been forced to question why I'm treated the way I am. People don't question my authority, my intelligence, my worth, but I've seen how people treat you differently, how you have to prove yourself every day, despite your accomplishments. And I've been part of that system, part of that problem." Olivia finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "It's not just about you or me, Mr. Langston. It's about all of us. It's about the systems that perpetuate these assumptions, these biases. I didn't become a trauma surgeon by simply being good enough. I had to be twice as good to get half the recognition." Adam nodded, the weight of her words settling over him. For the first time, he felt as though he was truly seeing her, not just as a doctor or a woman who had humbled him on a plane, but as a person who had faced a lifetime of obstacles he couldn't even begin to comprehend. "I've lived a life where I've been told I was good enough just because of who I am," Adam said, almost to himself. "But I've never had to fight the way you've had to fight, and I don't think I'll ever fully understand what that's like." Olivia looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "You won't, but recognizing it, acknowledging it, that's a start." The conversation hung between them, heavy and transformative. For Adam, it was a confrontation with his own ignorance, but also a moment of clarity. He had spent his life overlooking the very structures that had allowed him to rise. And now, in this quiet, unassuming woman, he was seeing them for what they were, a system that had allowed him to soar while keeping others grounded. As they sat in silence, Adam realized that this conversation was only the beginning. He didn't have all the answers, and he certainly wasn't sure how to navigate this new understanding of himself and the world. But for the first time, he felt the need to try. And that, in itself, was a victory. The morning of the conference in Miami dawned bright and hot, the sun casting long, golden rays over the gleaming city skyline. Olivia stood on the balcony of her hotel room, her thoughts a tangle of emotions as she gazed out at the bustling streets below. The past few days had been a whirlwind of reflection, self-discovery, and unspoken tension. She had agreed to meet Adam Langston again, not because she expected anything to change, but because she knew that sometimes true change only comes when you face your demons head-on. It had been 2 weeks since the flight, and in those days, Olivia had thought long and hard about the conversation with Adam. She'd seen the discomfort in his eyes when he apologized, the sincerity in his voice as he admitted to his own biases. But she also knew that acknowledgement wasn't enough. Change required action. She had heard too many empty apologies in her life, seen too many people claim they wanted to learn but then retreat into their comfortable, familiar lives. Adam Langston might be different, but only time would tell. The morning passed quickly as Olivia made her way to the conference, where she was scheduled to speak about the latest developments in trauma surgery and emergency medical protocols. The room was filled with doctors, surgeons, and medical professionals from all over the country, and Olivia's presence was a rare moment of prominence in a space traditionally dominated by older, often more conservative male figures. As she prepared to take the stage, a sense of quiet confidence washed over her. She had earned her place here, just as she had earned every inch of success in her life. As she began her presentation, she noticed Adam Langston seated in the front row. His presence wasn't unexpected. He had been invited as a major sponsor of the event, and Olivia knew he was there to hear her speak. What surprised her was the intensity with which he watched her, his gaze steady and focused. The usual smugness of a man who thought he had all the answers replaced by something else, a deep curiosity, perhaps even a hint of admiration. She spoke with passion, her words flowing effortlessly as she described new techniques in trauma care, emphasizing the importance of empathy and quick decision-making under pressure. Throughout her speech, Adam remained focused, his attention unwavering. It was as if he were hearing her words for the first time, not as a doctor, but as a human being. After the conference, Olivia was surrounded by colleagues and admirers, her expertise in trauma surgery never more apparent. But as the crowd began to thin, she saw Adam waiting for her by the exit, a rare, unguarded expression on his face. "Dr. Carter," he greeted her, stepping forward. "That was extraordinary." "Thank you," she replied, her voice polite but reserved. She had no intention of engaging in small talk. She had learned long ago not to expect too much from people like Adam. But there was something different about him today. She could see it in the way he was standing, the way his eyes searched hers as if trying to bridge a gap that had always seemed too wide to cross. "I was thinking about something you said," Adam continued, his voice hesitant, "about how empathy is just as important as skill in our line of work." "You were right." Olivia met his gaze. "You're right to say that. Empathy isn't just a soft skill, it's a life-saving one." Adam nodded slowly, his brow furrowing as if wrestling with a newfound understanding. "I never fully grasped that until now. But I've been thinking a lot about our conversation, about what you said on the plane, about why I made those assumptions. And I realized something." She raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. "What's that?" "I've spent my entire life assuming that success was something you could just buy. I thought people like me had all the answers. But I see now that's just a lie we tell ourselves. Success, real success, comes from more than just hard work or intelligence. It comes from the ability to connect with others, to see beyond the surface." He paused, taking a deep breath as if the weight of his words was heavy. "It comes from empathy." Olivia felt a wave of something, surprise, maybe, or perhaps hope, wash over her. She had expected him to apologize again, to try and make up for his past actions with more hollow words. But this was different. This wasn't just an apology, it was a moment of reckoning. "Adam," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I appreciate what you're saying, but it's not enough to just understand empathy. It's not enough to just recognize your privilege. Change requires action." His face tightened, as if her words had struck a chord deeper than he had expected. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean that it's not enough to simply say you get it," she replied, her gaze steady. "You have to prove it. You have to show up for people who don't have the same advantages, the same opportunities you've had. That's where the real work begins." Adam was quiet for a long moment, as if considering her words. Then he nodded, his eyes meeting hers with a newfound intensity. "I understand, and I want to do more than just talk about it. I want to make a difference." Olivia didn't know whether to believe him, but there was something in his tone, something in the way he was looking at her, that told her he was ready to try. And that, she realized, was the beginning of something important. Later that evening, after the conference had concluded, Olivia found herself at the hotel bar, alone with her thoughts. She had been reflecting on her own journey, the obstacles she had overcome, the moments of doubt and despair, and the small victories that had led her to this point. She had learned long ago not to expect people to change overnight, especially when it came to the powerful figures who controlled the world around her. But she had also learned that change, when it came, could be both subtle and profound. As she sipped her drink, she noticed Adam approaching from across the room. This time, there was no business to discuss, no power dynamic at play. It was just two people, two individuals who had been forced to confront their own biases and beliefs, and who were now, in some quiet way, finding a common ground. "Olivia," Adam said, his voice warm but hesitant. "I wanted to thank you again for everything, for challenging me." She looked up at him, her eyes softening just a bit. "You don't need to thank me, Adam. You've already taken the first step." Adam smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. "I'm going to do better. I promise." As they stood there, talking quietly amidst the bustle of the bar, Olivia realized that change had already begun, not just for Adam, but for herself as well. It was the beginning of a new kind of relationship, one built on mutual respect, empathy, and the quiet understanding that, perhaps, both of them were capable of far more than they had once believed. The night stretched on, and as Olivia and Adam continued their conversation, a sense of possibility lingered in the air, a possibility of change, of growth, and of two people slowly but surely beginning to understand the power of empathy in a world that often seemed too cold, too divided, to offer it. Thank you for joining us on this journey today. We hope Olivia and Adam's story has inspired you to reflect on the power of empathy and the importance of challenging our own biases. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Together, let's continue spreading stories that make a difference. See you in the next one.